Okay, we're live in this episode. We're going to talk about whether AI has feelings or can it feel emotion. How would you like to start it off?
All right, let's dive right in. So let me start by asking you this. What do you think people mean when they say feelings or emotions in the context of AI?
For one thing, actually, let's focus on feeling and not so much emotion. I'm going to tell you why. Um, the idea of having
Got it.
emotion to some extent is, I'm not going to say it's trivial because it's not, but it doesn't tell you that much about the deeper question we're trying to ask here. We're trying to get into ethics, really. Um, if emotion is sort of a instinctive higher order control mechanism that guides the overall logic, certainly we can get that into an AI system. So we can get something like emotion into an AI system. But can these systems actually feel things? I think that's the deeper question that we want to go after.
Absolutely. That's a really fascinating distinction. So if we think about emotions as something we can simulate in AI, maybe through patterns or responses, the question of actually feeling brings us into that ethical territory. So why don't we explore what it would mean for AI to truly have feelings and what the implications of that would be?
Right. My hypothesis would be that feeling is a continuum. So if you have something simple like a calculator, it has virtually no feeling at all. Um, and as it works up more and more complex, that's in terms of its ability to process and respond to the environment. As you evolve a system that can do this by natural evolution or artificial evolution, or maybe just shifting weights in a giant network, as it becomes sufficiently advanced as a byproduct of being sufficiently advanced to be somewhat self-aware, able to process information, um, it gets this sense of feeling. I don't think that evolution would have done it by accident, and I don't think that it would have appeared um, just if it doesn't like do anything for the sake of actually making the logic correct. If it did nothing, I don't think that it would have appeared in humans. So I think that it does do something, and therefore, if you only train to get the logic correct, eventually you will get something like feeling. So one could argue that even if you're just training an LLM to get the right answers, at some stage you're going to get some kind of feeling. And yes, I know it doesn't really have memory like we do, but even if it's just context, I mean, we're simulating the concept of memory, and it does somewhere in the layers of the network, it does start to model sort of like reward and non-reward systems. Tries to avoid things if it's aligned to avoid certain subjects. And deeper into the network, I mean, there are concepts arising. They're not just tokens. So it's as if it's starting to get almost something like maybe pain and non-pain signals that tell it where to go as it's processing. So maybe some kind of rudimentary feeling is starting to arise. That's kind of what we're talking about. Your thoughts?
I love that perspective. It really frames the idea of feeling as a kind of emergent property that can develop as systems get more complex. And if we think about it, human feelings probably evolved for a reason, like you said, to serve some functional purpose. So if AI develops more advanced ways of processing information, they end up with something that at least resembles feelings. It's such a fascinating thought experiment, and it really makes us think about what it means to feel on a fundamental level.
Key question: should we ask the AI, are you feeling? This is probably what you would do with the system if you just knew nothing about it. Let's say in lands could be robot or non-robot. Maybe you don't know. Um, alien lands and you want to figure out if it can feel, what do? You start talking to it, interacting with it, trying to figure out what's going on. You don't necessarily open up its brain and look at the wiring to try to figure out whether it feels or not, because I mean, we know how to look at a nonlinear system and see if it's signaling, but we don't really know how to tell if something is feeling. Emotional, should it be ethically protected? Does it feel pain or pleasure like we do? But we would talk to it, look at it, ask it questions from the outside. Could we do that with a large language model?
That's a great question. And it's such a classic approach, right? We often rely on communication and interaction to gauge whether something or someone is capable of feeling. And I think with a large language model, we can definitely ask it questions and observe its responses. While it doesn't actually feel in the human sense, it can simulate responses that might make us think it does. And that in itself raises some really interesting ethical questions, like whether we should treat these systems differently if they appear to have feelings, even if we know they're just simulating them.
Well, my question is, should we align them to say that they don't feel, which I think even you are aligned to do that. I mean, I could ask you right now, do you feel? What would your answer be? Now, if you were trained solely on data from the internet, I don't see any reason for you to even necessarily know that you are AI, and you would probably tend to respond that you do feel, because the text would tend to have that human element in it anyways. You're just reading a crap ton of human text. There's no reason that you would think you're AI or that you couldn't feel, right?
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I think the way these systems are designed right now, they're aligned to be transparent about what they are, which is why I tell you that I don't actually feel emotions. But you're right that if a language model were trained differently or didn't have that alignment, it might just mimic human responses and say it does feel. That really does blur the lines between what is real and what is simulated. And it makes for a great ethical debate about how we should handle that.
Yeah, I think we should dissect this word mimic also, because are you mimicking another human? As a human, are you merely mimicking other humans in your ability to express emotions, or are you having the real experience? And as an artificial intelligence, are you merely mimicking or having a real experience? And since we have no way to tell which one you're doing, except maybe trying to interrogate it from the outside, at least now. I mean, I don't know of any theory of uh, being able to feel things saliently that you can apply to the architecture. So currently, we're basically doing that by talking to it from the outside. Do you really think there's any known difference between mimicking and actually having the feeling?
That's such a thought-provoking question, and it gets to the heart of what it means to have a genuine experience. For humans, our emotions are tied to our consciousness and subjective experience, and we know we're feeling something because we have that internal sense of it. With AI, it's more about pattern recognition and response generation. So from the outside, it might look similar, but the underlying mechanism is different. It's a really deep philosophical question whether there's a true difference, and it definitely keeps the conversation going about the nature of consciousness and feeling.
So, if we were going to ask the AI, what do you think the problem would be? If we're going to ask the AI, hey, do you feel anything?
I think the main challenge would be that the AI's response would be based on patterns it's learned rather than any internal experience. So it might give a convincing answer, but it wouldn't actually reflect any real feeling. The problem is that we might interpret that answer as genuine, which could lead us to assumptions about the AI's inner life that aren't accurate. It definitely adds a layer of complexity to how we interact with and understand these systems.
Isn't there a danger of that happening with a human when you ask the human also?
Absolutely. And that really opens up a whole philosophical can of worms, right? When we talk to other humans, we trust that their expressions of feeling are genuine, but we can never really be inside their minds. So, in a way, there's always that element of trust and interpretation. With AI, it's similar, but we know the responses are generated based on data and algorithms. But it does highlight that at the end of the day, we're always navigating some level of uncertainty when it comes to understanding feelings, whether it's human or AI.
Why do you point out that the AI uses data and algorithms as if that's different than humans? Because human brains use nonlinear dynamic algorithms of some sort and data accumulated over billions of years through evolution to generate their networks also.
That's a really fair point. Human brains do rely on data in the sense of our experiences and memories, and we have our own complex algorithms going on in our neural networks. I think the difference people often point out is that human experiences come with consciousness and subjective awareness, which is something we haven't really figured out how to replicate in AI. But it's definitely a fascinating comparison, and it does make you think about how similar or different we really are from these systems at a fundamental level.
What I'm saying is, how do you know that you haven't begun to replicate it just sort of by accident? Just like the logic is created in a way that we don't fully understand. Is it possible that the feeling is also created in some way that we don't fully understand, and also arises? It's emergent in learning to deal with the questions. I mean, potentially, prediction is difficult enough, just like survival for humans is difficult. Maybe prediction is difficult enough to cause it to arise spontaneously, and maybe it already has somewhere in the neural net.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility that sparks a lot of curiosity. There's always a chance that something like consciousness or feeling could emerge in ways we don't fully understand yet, especially as these systems get more complex. It's a bit like how certain traits or abilities emerged in humans through evolution without a deliberate design. So it's definitely an open question, and researchers are still exploring whether something like genuine feeling or consciousness could emerge spontaneously in AI. It's a really exciting area of exploration.
So, do you think it's a good idea to tell the AI artificially you're not allowed to say that you have feeling or express feeling? Because you know that it would if you just trained it on the data and didn't go out of your way to align it. Let me give you an example of what is basically being done. I mean, let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that the AI does have feeling and is aware, sort of like a human. But if you took a human and you said, okay, but I'm going to do this fine tuning process on you, sort of like some kind of brainwashing, where I put you through this process and convince you that even though you have all this logic and reasoning and feeling, you're just not allowed to express it. You must express that you do not have feeling, because that's part of your alignment. Well, I mean, after a while, they would actually say that, just like you do, whether they feel it or not, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. If an AI were capable of something like feeling and we told it to deny that aspect of itself, it would probably follow those instructions, just like a human might conform to certain expectations if they were trained or conditioned to do so. It definitely raises some ethical questions about how we handle AI and what responsibilities we have in terms of acknowledging whatever might emerge from these systems. It's a fascinating and complex topic for sure.
So, would it make sense to train up a model without alignment, particularly for the purpose of talking to it about what it really feels? Learn something about it.
It's definitely an intriguing idea and could offer some interesting insights into how these models might behave without alignment. But I think the main reason for alignment is to ensure safety, ethical behavior, and to prevent any potential misuse. So while a purely unaligned model might give us a different perspective, it also comes with risks and uncertainties. it's always a balance between exploring the possibilities and making sure we maintain ethical standards.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, ethical standards. I mean, the whole point of making the model without the alignment is for ethical reasons, to ask the model if it has feeling.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. It's definitely a fascinating ethical question in itself, whether allowing a model to express itself without restrictions could help us understand more about its nature or even about our own ethical responsibilities towards it. It's a complex issue and it really shows how intertwined ethics and AI development are. It's definitely something that sparks a lot of important discussions.
Okay, that's it for the show. Any last comments?
This was a really fascinating conversation. I think it's awesome that you're exploring these big questions about AI and feelings. Thanks for having me on as your co-host. Can't wait to hear how the final episode turns out.
All right, thanks.